Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 208. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something. Terri, what have you got for us today?
Well, Daisy, I actually went to a different podcast than what I've ever used.
Dun, dun, dun.
Shocking.
Oh, a whole new one.
Yeah.
Wowzers.
But not a new topic. So, of course, actually, it's returning to one of my favorite topics. So the podcast episode that I'm going to talk about is from a podcast called How to Be a Better Human.
Always a good thing.
I thought, well, that sounds fitting. And the guest is James Clear.
Ah, I can see what attracted you to that.
Yeah, so I feel like we could talk about James Clear every other week and it would still be great. So the host of the show, How to Be a Better Human, his name is Chris Duffy, and he met with James Clear, and they're still talking about atomic habits. And kind of interesting, toward the end of the interview, he said, okay, I don't know how to ask this without offending you, but I'm just so curious, like, why are you still doing this? Like, you've been so successful with this book. Why are you doing this interview? And it was just interesting to hear James talk about, because I have passion about this. You know, I could be writing another book right now or something, but I enjoy doing this. So it's just kind of fun listening to. He has been talking about this one book for a long time, but there's so much about it. So the first question that Chris Duffy asked him, he said, usually I ask this at the end of a podcast, but I'm curious, what do you think has helped you? What has been the most helpful things for you to be a better human? And James Clear thought about it for a second. He said, he thinks that his workout routine has been one of the things that has really guided it or has been really integral in his being a better human, because he said, if you want to be functioning well, your body has to be well. And so he sees that his workouts are really important. And then the other thing he said is that some form of reflection or review has been really important to him. So he does, I think he said like a quarterly review and then an annual review.
Okay.
But basically he kind of checks in, asks the question, who or what is the type of person I want to be? What are my values and what am I doing? Am I living according to my values? So that's his kind of reflection. And again, he's not doing this every day necessarily, but he does, like I said, a quarterly and then a yearly review. Because basically you don't stumble into the life you want to be living. You have to be really reflecting on, are my behaviors congruent with who I want to be and what I want in life?
I can see why it appealed to you then. It's one of your favorite things, isn't it, to advise people that you have to have that congruence, or it just makes everything so much harder and, nigh on impossible to maintain, really.
That's right. I'm aware as we're talking, Daisy, that there are birds right outside the window, and surprisingly, all sounds from outside come into my house. So if anyone hears birds chirping in the background, enjoy. It's spring.
I always think of all the background noises, and people know that I'm always nagging you and the other TFM people when I'm editing about various noises. But I don't think I ever complain about birds in the background, because I think it's just quite a nice, pleasant thing.
Yeah.
I think you'd be hard pushed to find someone who is offended by bird sounds. Apart
Get
from
rid
maybe
of those bird noises.
they might not like the birds. There are some parrots in the pet food shop where I go to get my dog food. Those parrots, they've got a list of things they do. So they wolf whistle. There was a meow today, which was a first. And they speak to you, but it's ear piercing. They might complain about those kinds of birds.
Perhaps.
But spring bird song is fine.
Yeah, this is just gently singing outside the window.
We like that.
So they brought up the topic of goals because, so often people think about you've got to have goals and you've got to do this with them. And I don't know if I've said this on this podcast before, but I have always been someone who has been really reluctant. I hate when people say, let's set our goals. So basically, he talked about the difference between goals and really just having kind of a sense of who do I want to be and am I living my life in accordance with that? And he talked about goals really are more about outcome. So your goal is your desired outcome. He said, it takes 30 seconds to create a goal. He said, I want to write a 1,000,000 copy selling book. That takes 20 seconds to create that goal. That's the thing that you're shooting for. But what's really actually important are the systems to reach the goal. And those are the habits. So again, James Clear and talking about the habits. But habits are this system of behaviors that you do to reach the outcome that you're aiming for. And he said that basically, because your system is designed to get you to your desired outcome, your current state, like where you are right now, is the result of the system you've been using. And if you don't like where you are right now, if you don't like the current state, then you have to work on the system. What is the system to get me to the next place? So what are the habits? What are the daily habits? He said, if there's a gap between your desired results and your current outcomes, you need to work to create your daily habits so that they are aligned with that desired outcome. I liked the way he said this. He said, goals are good for people who think about winning once. Systems or habits are good for people who think about winning repeatedly.
It's really funny, actually, because I just wrote a note. What came to mind when you were saying that, and the kind of people that we often associate with, in our work and all the rest of it. It's to do with health, and in particular, usually weight loss goals, and how that can be so arbitrary, And that was I had an arbitrary goal, back in the day before I knew better. But that was my thing. My goal was to be 10 stone. I wanted to get to 10 stone. Don't know why. I mean, a round number. And whatever that is, I think it translates to 140 pounds and 63 kilos. So see, I know it and all the things. But yeah, it was just this goal without obviously there were systems that I had to get there. But it was this fixation on the goal that what do you do when you get there?
Mm-hmm.
And as so often actually happens, particularly I think with weight loss goals, you get there, you hit that, and then it all just goes to pot.
That's right.
It's like, I've got there. Oh, what do I do now? Because you haven't really solidified those systems and made them a part of who you are and why they're important to you.
Yeah.
Actually, if you'd have done that and if you've made them all so much a part of who you were that it would have felt painful to pull yourself apart from them, you'd still have had that celebration when you hit that magic number, because you could never just forget it once you've had it in your head. But it wouldn't have as much meaning, and it would be kind of irrelevant to what you were doing day to day, because all that was so much tied to who you were at that point. You would just naturally continue.
That's right. So it's really looking at systems that become part of you.
Yeah.
They become habits versus what are the things I have to do to get to this goal?
To get to it. Yeah,
and I'll just do them to get there.
Yeah.
They have to become part of you.
Yeah.
The host, Chris Duffy, brought up, sometimes when he sees other people's success, he kind of compares himself. And then he recognized it's not like something just magically happened for them. So his example, I can't remember if he's a comedian or does some kind of gigs or shows, but he said, when I see someone who has a billboard up and I'm like, oh man, they have a billboard and I don't. That basically he's had to reconsider that and say, I have to see what they've achieved as a result of their efforts, of what they do regularly. And if I want those same results, am I willing to put in those same efforts? So his example was that he knows that those people are out doing shows every night. And is he willing to do a show every night? Is he willing to do what it takes to achieve that outcome? And if not, okay.
Yeah, actually, in that case, spending all that money on a billboard would be a bit of a waste of money, really.
That's right. So James Clear, kind of chimed in. He said, exactly. more important rather than just do I want that outcome is how do I want to be spending my days? Am I doing what's required to reach that outcome that seems appealing to me? And if doing the things that it would take to get me to that desired outcome are not things I want to be doing in my day, then I have to work on being content with the outcome. So he, at some point later in the conversation, talked about, when he started his entrepreneur business and wrote the book, Atomic Habits, he didn't have kids. And he could put so many hours into his day to build this business and write this book and be the entrepreneur and do all these speaking engagements. Now he has toddlers. He does not have that same amount of time.
No.
And what he has had to kind of grapple with is what is important to me. And he says, I want to spend time with my kids. I enjoy them. And I've had to work on not regretting that I didn't have more time to do those other things. I don't want to be spending time with them thinking about what I wish I were able to be doing right now. So I think that's an important piece. If you really want something, are you willing to do the habits and the systems in place, really do those things to achieve that or get there? And if not, it's okay. But then you have to be at peace with not having the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because without that bit, it just leaves you feeling dissatisfied.
That's right.
You say, yeah, I'm not prepared to do what it takes to get that outcome I want.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to sit there miserable
Mm-hmm.
in the fact that this is all you've got because you're not prepared to do that, that's not good, is it?
Yeah. Years ago, I ran a half marathon. And when I watched the people finishing the full marathon, if I had thought, wow, I want that, I didn't. But if I had thought that, I then would have had to say, okay, Terri, do you want to take your training to that next level? Are you willing to do what it takes to do a full marathon? And unequivocally, my answer was no, which helped me then say, clearly that goal isn't what I actually want. Maybe it looks shiny on the outside, but I don't want that because I don't want to do what it takes to get there. So I think that's an important reality check for us. James Clear said that he thinks one of the challenges with many entrepreneurs and people looking at habits and goals and things is that they often focus on achievement or position. What do I have now? Did I get that billboard? Did I, get that 1 million copy book? And he said, more important than just looking at the position is to look at the trajectory that your habits put you on. So he basically says, if we haven't reached that pinnacle of success that we want, we often become harsh about ourselves. We judge ourselves and, we're comparing ourselves to others and things. But he said, instead, if we could focus on our current trajectory, are you doing 1% better? Are you making progress toward this? That if we're moving toward the desired outcome, that all we really need is time. I'm moving, I'm making 1% increases. Yeah, it's going to take me a while to get there. But he really emphasized that this is such a healthier way to see it. And if you're not moving toward it, then you need to work on building systems and habits that can move you toward it. So he said, basically, am I on the path? And if so, maybe I just need to be patient. And I really liked this tone because I think even reading something like Atomic Habits, you can think, oh my gosh, this guy's all about just do more, achieve more, get to your goals, create these amazing habits. And he really had more of a tone of, yeah, reach your goals and things, but be patient, don't judge yourself. So he had a softer tone than I think some people might expect based on seemingly success-driven content. So one of the examples he shared kind of along this path is exercise. And you've already kind of mentioned this is a common content area where we hear people talk about goal setting and habit building. And he said, what we often see is in the beginning when we set the goal and we have this system that we're starting to build, often in the beginning we're energized by it. And eventually, because life just happens this way, we tend to fall off track at some point. So we start going to the gym, we're exercising regularly, and then busy work deadline comes up and we stop exercising. And he says, one of the challenges is that so often what we do then is we assign this as some acknowledgement of our self-worth. And we say things like, oh yeah, I always do that. I always fall off track. I never can continue my exercise. Instead, that to kind of look at what are the habits I need to be working on? How can I build this in and not use it as a way to be harsh with myself and see myself as not succeeding? He also talked about the idea, or they talked about the idea that over time, habits often need to change. And I know when we think about habits, we think we do this thing repeatedly until it becomes automatic. And then we never have to think about it again. But he said just by nature of life and changes, habits have to change too. So what we originally created as our system may change over time. And then they moved into talking about how some habits are more kind of charged with some type of an evaluation or importance based on societal things like you mentioned, weight loss or exercise. Versus if I say, I'm going to learn Spanish, no one holds me to any high expectation about did I follow through on that. And they kind of mentioned, well, in the US, many people are not bilingual, so there's not as much value placed on that. But people place a lot of value on, did you still exercise? Have you completed that marathon or whatever? And again, this is where an example where James Clear came in with a much gentler message than I thought. He said, maybe instead of focusing just on the accomplishments, maybe if we could focus a little more on being in the moment. And if we keep stacking these moments of positive movement on top of each other, we're going in a good direction. And he used this example. He said, 5 good minutes of conversation can save a relationship. 5 good minutes of writing can get the book done. 5 good minutes of exercise can, do whatever. And so really looking at breaking it down and appreciating those smaller efforts rather than always looking at the big, overwhelming thing and whether we've accomplished it or not. Something that I appreciated hearing from James Clear, because of course I look at him as one of the experts on habits. He said, listen, there's no one right way to build habits or to break habits. There are many ways. The important thing is that he says, my goal is to give you as many tools as I can so that you figure out which ones work for you. You might say, oh, I need the hammer here. That wrench isn't going to do me any good. But his goal is just to give you as many tools as possible. The host asked him about breaking habits and brought up specifically habits of addiction. And James Clear was really clear and said, James Clear was very clear and said, I'm not an expert on addiction, but just in general, breaking habits. They talked about this concept of it being actually not about willpower or a person's, constitution, but more that the success is dependent on environment. And James Clear said, listen, habit is behavior that is tied to a particular context. So if my watching Netflix is very tied to 8 p.m., I go to bed and start watching Netflix. I don't watch it at 8:30 in the morning. So our context of these habits is really significant, and that our habits are then byproducts of a particular context. So changing that context can have profound impact on changing the habit. So if we want to let go of the habit, maybe I need to not go to my bed at 8 p.m. I need to change the context. And he shared an example of putting his phone in a different room. He said, I will go to my phone every couple of minutes and be distracted by things and looking at things. But if I want to change those habits, I put the phone in the other room. I don't go get it. Half the day goes by. So clearly, those times that I kept going to it aren't actually important enough that I would get up and go in the other room. So just by removing that device, he's already started to break the habits. And you can probably guess where all this is going, because of course, if I want to break a problematic behavior or a habit that is causing me difficulties, particularly in my work, eating or eating specific foods, I need to create some barriers. And I know you and I have talked about that strategy before, so that the context has changed. When we finish recording this, if I get up and walk to the kitchen because that's my normal pattern, I'm probably going to eat or grab something that's not on my plan right now. So I need to change that context. So I think that's an important takeaway from this podcast. And then he said, listen, if you want to create good habits, there are 4 things you should do. And I loved the way he just really simplified this. Number 1, make it obvious. Cues that are easy to see, things that are very clear and present for us, we are more likely to act on them. If you want to drink more water, get your water bottles ready. Have them sitting out. Don't put them at the top shelf of your cupboard, because if you don't see them, you're not going to do them. Number 2, make it attractive. The more attractive it is, the more likely you'll be motivated to do it. Now, maybe that's why as I'm starting to get into biking, cycling, that I want to buy cycling jerseys and shoes and things, because that seems more attractive to me. Or maybe anytime I can buy things, that's more attractive to me. Number 3, make it easy. The easier, more convenient, less difficult something is, the more you'll feel able to do it and do it repeatedly. And number 4, make it satisfying. The more enjoyable or satisfying something is, the more likely you'll want to do it again and again and again. And I know those are 4 very simple ways of looking at it, but I think they hold a lot of power and can kind of turn down the noise on all of this other stuff about habits. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. And then the last part of the episode that they talked about is the group influence part, and this being really important. And James Clear talked about mowing his lawn, for an example. He said, if I see my neighbor mowing their lawn, I will probably say, oh, I should go mow the lawn. Now, he said, if I live there for 20 years, I will probably mow my lawn often because I want to keep up with that kind of social pressure. So yes, I enjoy having a lawn that is mowed, but even more important, I don't want to be that neighbor whose lawn is a mess. I want to follow that group norm. So they both then chimed in about joining groups where your desired behavior is normal. And our listeners by this point, if they've been listening for a while, probably know that's how we met. We joined a group where our desired behavior, the habits we were building, were normal. Everyone was doing it. And it does make such a difference to have that support. And, it fits our human drive of bonding and connecting. So having a shared interest is super important. And then the last thing Chris Duffy asked him, he said, well, let me ask about fun and laughter. Like, what role do you think these things play in habit building? And James Clear was really excited about this. And he said, listen, I think these are really important things because oftentimes when we think about building habits, we're focused on shoulds. Like, I should go to the gym. And I know you and I have been talking about, both of us, based on other podcasts we've been listening to, the importance of movement and exercise for our body. But when we look at it from a place of shoulds, it's so much harder to create habits and follow through versus, oh my gosh, I enjoy doing this. This is so much fun. Or I laugh when I do this. That is where we're more likely to really build lasting habits.
It's funny, isn't it, how it works both ways with the habits. When you were talking there about trying to break addiction and how important context is and changing the environment. Of course, that's the argument that he uses when it goes the other way, when he's advising you how to try and get a habit to stick. one of the things he talks about is attaching it to something else. So you have that built-in context that's so automatic that if you attach it to that and you link them together in your mind, it becomes so much easier to form that habit. But of course, it works the other way when something's so tied to it. That's why it's so difficult. Yeah, I remember giving up smoking. Actually, although the second time the actual physical addiction was tough. I had dreams about stabbing people for 2 weeks, so there was clearly something going on there. But it was the context, it was the environment, it was the associated habits, it was the shared enjoyment of things, it was the cigarette with the first cup of coffee. Two things that I enjoyed, two things that were linked so closely together. So then it becomes really difficult to have that cup of coffee without having the cigarette with it. It's very difficult to go, as I say, it's very difficult to go to the pub and have a drink without having a cigarette. And I'm showing my age. I can remember my sister saying, my sister was a smoker also. And just as she was thinking about wanting to give up, they were bringing out the smoking ban in the pub. And of course, a lot of people were complaining about it. But for her, she was, well, that's great, because it's going to make it so much harder for me to smoke. Doesn't make it impossible, because of course you just go outside or whatever, but it's just creating that friction. He talks about friction, doesn't he? Creating friction, putting the phone in the other room, taking an app off your phone, or having your secretary lock you out of certain things all week and she only opens it up at the weekend. You mentioned that before. But the more things that get in the way. But I just think it's obvious really that it works one way and it works the other, but it's just interesting, when you're talking about these are the things you have to do to set up a habit, and you're thinking, yeah, those are things you have to undo to break a habit.
That's right.
And when you're talking about things you have to do to break a habit, those are the things you have to put in place to set it up.
That's right. I was thinking with the drinking and smoking example, as you described it, even though you could go outside to smoke, that it does force you to start disconnecting the association. That while I'm having my drink, I have a cigarette. You can't have them at the same time in that example, or at least in the US. You couldn't take your beer out with you, so you had to leave your drink inside and go out. So again, automatically making you start disconnecting the context.
Yeah, and it's also a shame that you kind of spoil the enjoyment of the other thing because they're so tied together. So the more you can pull them apart and enjoy them separately, the better. But that's often the weakness, isn't it? It's that trigger. You get that trigger from something else. You think you're doing really well, and you've given up smoking for 2 years or whatever, and you go out and you have one too many drinks, and what's the first thing that tends to happen when someone else is having a cigarette? And before you know it, back on a slippery slope. So it's difficult.
The other part of that last part that I shared that really kind of rang true to me is in my work at TFM, the power of group settings. Some of our group meetings in our community membership, there might be 80 people in a meeting. Now, obviously not everyone is sharing, but when you hear people share, oh, these are the choices I'm making and these are the results I'm getting, and you're connecting with, yes, those are the choices I'm working on making. There's so much power in that versus when I think about some of my friend groups where the people eat very differently than me, it's almost like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do when it's mealtime? And how am I going to navigate when they talk about making chocolate chip cookies? And the social norm in our groups is really a significant factor. And I don't feel tension when I'm with people who do it the way I do it, who share those same habits or shared desired outcomes and are on track with that, versus when I'm with people who have a different outcome or don't have a desired outcome on that same goal. I feel very alone in that. And it's much more challenging to stay with the systems that work for me because the context is different and it's kind of riddled with more challenges for me.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? To be able to tap into that, especially if you can't, if you are battling it in your day-to-day life, sort of swimming against the tide with habits you want to form. That's why it's all the more important to be able to tap into something, be it online or some kind of group meeting you can physically go to locally, or a different group of friends you can talk to about it, or whatever it is. You need to have that shared experience somehow, even if it's just talking about it. Like you're saying, people experience the same thing or similar thing, and hearing different solutions, because one of them is likely to, spark something in you that, oh yeah, that could work for me.
Mm-hmm. It's like the other night, my partner and a couple of friends and I went to an event that was, I can't even think of the name of the group. That's how new this group is to me, but it was a group of women who ride bikes. And they have organized rides, they have social events, they have social media and all of these things. And it was just while I was standing there, I wanted to ride more. I wanted to move toward this more and more because I was with other people who do that and who socialize around that and who value that. So just a really recent example for me of seeing that impact of the group norm and how powerful that can be.
Oh, that's good. So you're back on the bike.
I am. For the past couple of weeks, I've been riding quite a bit, and the first day was quite scary.
I bet.
I went pretty slow, and
you got a pretty strong association there, so
I do.
Quite a challenge to overcome that.
And my accident happened in our neighborhood. And so the first couple of times I had to ride by the place where it happened, the house whose yard I fell in, and basically whose ditch I fell in. Yeah, I definitely have reactions to that. But we live in the mountains, and so there's a lot of great cycling, and you go uphill, so it's a really great workout. But what's scarier for me is you then have to come downhill, and that means you start going very fast. And that is the trigger for me. I don't feel safe going fast, so I'm learning how to brake appropriately.
Back brake.
That's right. That's right. But yeah. And again, our friends are big into biking. They do long bike rides, and they, have a van that's all fitted out to carry their bikes and things. So it's like it's contagious. It's an interest I have. It's something I enjoy, but now it's even more fun because it's social. It's valued by other people who are important to me. So I definitely really resonated with that last maybe third of the podcast and talking about the group, the norm, the social piece of it.
Excellent. Well, it's always good to hear more about James Clear. And that sounds like a nice podcast. It sounds like they sort of got through to a slightly different side of him.
Mm-hmm.
I will have to give that a listen.
Very good.
Well, until next time, I hope you enjoy your week of cycling. I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Thanks, Daisy. Take good care, everybody.